Now, was Haiti your first sense of combat?
Yeah, I mean, Haiti was there were aspects of it were pretty tame. I mean, it got intense a couple of times, but nothing really of much consequence. Haiti was just a very poor, um, Haiti's a very poor place, at least back then it was. And the rule of law was, I mean, there was almost no rule of law. And so we were constantly, rolling up on people who had cut each other up with machetes and farm tools. They had some guns that were down there, but not very much. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. They had guns that were down there too. And so, but we would end up kind of afterwards. But back then, what the frap would do is they would call in. So the frap would play the Americans against the Americans. So they would call in tips about people that they wanted to later rob. And so we would go there and we were disarming everybody. And then we stopped doing that, by the way, but because then the frap would go in, they would watch, they'd see the Americans show up, and then we'd leave. If they had any guns, we'd take them, and then the frap would go in there and essentially murder everybody while they were stealing all any of their goods and stuff. So we ended up having to stop doing that. It was I mean, it was chaos. I mean, it was a fantastic experience, but not one I would wish on anybody.
What else do you remember when you were at Haiti?
Just the poverty. I mean, it was striking. The poverty, like Port-au-Prince, the like parts of the city. We had an area that was called Site Soleil, which is one of the poor, at least back then, it was one of the poor areas. It was very lawless. Um, Parts of the city looked like it had gone through an artillery barrage, and the streets were covered in garbage. And um, we'd go out at night, and the smell of burning tires and plastics, still to this day, if I smell burning plastic or something like that, it will take me back to it'll take me back to Haiti. And so if you've ever seen the movie Escape from New York, in the beginning part, when the protagonist lands, it's Kurt Russell, and he's walking through like this. I mean, it looks like war-torn New York, and there's like shadows zipping by and little burning campfires and stuff that's going on. And that's what Port-au-Prince was like. It was spooky, yeah, I mean, it was surreal thinking about it. I haven't thought about Haiti in a while, so thinking about it now, it's like there was, and there was voodoo stuff all over the place. When you get out in the countryside, you could hear them. They'd have big drum circles going, and it was like some voodoo get together or whatnot. So it was a very different kind of a place. So after Haiti, I got out. So it was a rough time to be in the army. Um, President Clinton had slashed. I think that we went from like 21 divisions down to like 9 division, or I mean, it was a huge cutback in the military force. And so, like, even going to Haiti, being in special operations, we had gone to DRMO, which is disposal and reutilization, the surplus gear. The only place we could get surplus gear or get gear for the deployment was we went to DRMO so that we could have some excess kit to take with us down to Haiti. And so, anyways, so reached the end of that, and I was like, well, I'm gonna get out, and I'm gonna go back to the guard, because the guard, we were getting great trips there, and the availability of schools was a little bit better. At that point, I was on a combat dive team, so I'd gone to ranger school, I'd been to scuba school, combat dive school, and still wanted to look at doing some other stuff. And so at that point, I was like, I'm going to get out for a little bit and go to the guard. And I was looking really closely at law enforcement. And so, having been in Seattle, was a bigger city, and was like, oh, okay, so law enforcement could be cool. And at that time, the war on drugs was in was in full steam, and it was like, okay, where's the war at? So I got out and went back to 19th Group, and then I was a deputy for about a year while I was waiting to get hired by the Drug Enforcement Administration. And so worked at a local jail here in Utah. It was a phenomenal education with learning how to speak the language and talk to inmates and talk to felons and a lot of them violent felons, and keep the peace. And then I got hired by DEA, and they sent me up to Seattle. So I was up in Seattle for Fort Lewis, came back to Utah, and DEA had a policy that the place where you were hired, you could not stay. You had to move. And so when I was at Quantico going through the academy, um, got out or there Seattle came up, and I was like, well, geez, I know Seattle, and I'll go back there. So me and another classmate, we went to Seattle, and I hit, and I was up in the office only a short period of time, and then I got hayed to go to what was called the mobile enforcement team. And so it was like the special forces mission all over again, because there was a small group of DEA agents, and we would travel to police departments, sheriff's offices, state, county, municipality, and if the requirement was they had to have a violent drug offender problem, and then they would deploy the MET group, so the mobile enforcement group, and we would go down there and we'd work the cases and take them up, and then we'd start kicking doors and arresting bad guys. And I had a blast doing that. So at one time I had long hair and earrings and a long beard. Back then, nobody had beards except for, bikers. And so I had long hair and a long beard, and worked a ton of undercover, and I had a blast. And so it was like, I, I basically took off my Green Beret and put on, a DEA hat, but the work was a very similar, because I was interfacing, we had to win. It was Robin Sage. We would go into these small municipalities, and sometimes even big ones. Like we worked with Portland, the city of Portland, their police department, and we would go in and we would help, and we would do, I'd go out and I'd do buys with, I was buying heroin and crack and methamphetamine and ecstasy, and from all different, you know, types of people, and pretty tense situations sometimes. And then we served our own warrants. So then these were all violent drug offenders. And then I'd put on my black balaclava and body armor, and would go kick the doors and go after those guys. So I accumulated a ton of experience that later on served me well, leading up to later on when I was a team sergeant on the invasion, because now I was getting all this practical wisdom that nobody in the military was really getting. There was one point we kicked the door every day for a month. And so when we were taking this stuff down. We were working weekends, and we were working so many hours that the HR lady told us that we couldn't claim all those hours because it was illegal. But I was on a great team. One of the other guys, one of my teammates, my partner, he was a former Marine. There was another guy that was a teammate. He was a former SEAL. So there was most of us were former military, and it was just like, whew, this is awesome. We're in our 30s, and we're just having a blast, and going after all these bad guys. So it was a lot of fun. My first undercover deal, I went in, and the cover team was about half a mile away, and that's a long way if things go bad. And I was wearing a wire so that we could record everything, and went into this old crappy hotel, and the hotel was kind of a U shaped, and it was like rooms, 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 and they were running prostitution and all kinds of dope out of there. And anyways, the very corner room I was gonna meet, and and so I was working with an informant that was gonna introduce me to the guy that was um, supplying the heroin. So I was buying heroin. And so that's another sketchy thing is it's not just you a lot of times. It's you and you've got somebody that's working off a criminal charge. So it's like, hey, work with us, we'll give you a lesser sentence or, whatnot. And so you're working with criminals. Again, it's the special forces model, which is why, I gravitated to it so much. And so anyways, I go into this back room and I'm sitting on the bed and we wait, and the guy that's the informant that's introducing me is this old dude that looks like he's about 1,000 years old. He was in the reality, he was only 40 years old, but he had been a heroin addict for like 10 years. He was super thin, like his face looked like it was a skull, and he was working off a charge or something. And so, anyways, the guy comes in that's selling the heroin, and he's like, who are you? And so, you kind of do this dance back and forth, and anyways, he starts talking about and bragging about how they beat a dude to death the night prior. And it was like, yeah, this guy, he was working for the cops, and so he's bragging. It's like we knew he was doing it. We got baseball bats, and I'm too stupid to be scared at this point because I'm like, this is fantastic. Speak into the microphone, I'm catching all this on the wire, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's violent drug offender. This is exactly what we're looking for. He's admitting to a murder, him and some other guys. And I'm just sitting here eating it up, and I'm like, well, this is great. So we do the deal, and this guy leaves. And so I'm like, okay, money. So I finish up with the informant, the snitch, and I walk out and walk down the thing, get my car, and I drive to our location where I'm going to meet the my cover team, because the wire, they can hear everything that's going on inside the room. So if something had gone bad, then they're my cavalry and they're going to come in and rescue me, right? And so I get to the parking lot or wherever we're meeting, and jump out. My boss is like, how'd it go? And I was like, it was amazing. I got so much great stuff on the wire. It's fantastic. This dude admitted to murdering somebody the night prior. I was like, I was like, it'll be, just wait till you hear the tape. And my boss goes, yeah. Um, as soon as you walked in the room, the wire went dead. And I was like, say what? And he was like, yeah, as soon as you walked into that room, the wire went dead. So now I'm like, well, wait a minute. How would you have known if I'd been in trouble? And he was like, we wouldn't have. So from that moment on, that set the pace for the rest of all of my undercover work that I did, because I never took it for granted that somebody was coming, that somebody was going to help. And funny enough, later on, when I was in the counterterrorist unit, I very much kept that attitude, and it saved us a couple of times too.
So how long were you DEA for?
About 4 years.
And then you went back to Special Forces after?
I did, yeah. So, 9/11. I mean, we all remember where we were at, if you were alive, right? And
Or was it?
I was walking out to my car. I was in DEA, and I was walking out to my car, and I get a call, cell phone call, and as a matter of fact, it was the guy that was on my team that was a SEAL, had been a SEAL, and he's like, "Hey, man, did you hear what just happened?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Hey, the the Twin Towers just got hit by an aircraft. The second aircraft hadn't hit yet." I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "An airplane, a passenger airplane just flew in." And I was like, and he was like, he's like, they're putting the word out. They're calling all the agents to stay home. And so I was like, okay. So I ran back inside, and it was just after the second aircraft had hit, and we were all like, holy crap! Like those of us that had been in the military, one may be an accident, two that ain't no accident. All of us were like, we're going to war, and administration up at DEA headquarters and DEA Seattle, they put out the world word. They were like, all agents stay home, get all of your tack gear ready, and be prepared, because it looked like, I mean, there was a very real possibility or thought within the, within the group. It was like, man, we may be fighting here in Seattle, because at that point we had no idea what was going on. But all of us knew it was like, we're going to war. And then, we sat at home on call for, I forget how many days. They didn't want us to come into the office because they didn't know if there were more bombs, there's going to be an attack or ambushes. So all the special agents, we stayed out at our home so that we could react in case something came up. And so, anyways, then it became evident what it was, and Osama bin Laden, um, so we started spinning up, because because I was in 19th group up in Washington at that time, and we got the word, and it was like, well, it's only a matter of time. We're going to war, and so we spun up. And at that time, it looked like there was going to be two invasion. It looked like we were going to invade Afghanistan and the Philippines. And so one of the preparatory groups, so the group up in Washington, we didn't go to Afghanistan. The guys in Utah went to Afghanistan on some of the real early days of teams going out. And then my team and another team went to the Philippines as kind of a preparatory, to start working with their scout rangers that were over there. So we went over there for a month or so. It was almost like it was a J set, but it wasn't a J set because the terrorism was alive and well over there with Abu Sayyaf. And so we were spinning up. We were up north. We weren't down south where those guys were, but it was a spin up to start getting their scout rangers ready, to deploy down south to fight them and take on that advisor role. And then I spent I'm trying to remember how long we spent over there, a couple months or something, and then rotated back to the States. And then about that time, it was like, okay, now Iraq was on the docket, and so that unit up there, our company got Hey to go over as the preparatory to lead up to the invasion of Iraq. And so when it looked like we were going, and so we headed over in '02, and then we were what was called the Coalition Support Team, CSTs. And so what we were doing was, as troops were coming in and setting up these operating bases in the desert to get ready to go over the berm into Iraq. They were in Kuwait. We were in Kuwait. We were interfacing with the Kuwaiti tanks and their reconnaissance forces. And then when the invasion kicked off, then we had been pulled back. I was up on the border back and forth along where Kuwait and Iraq, and just making sure that the Iraqis weren't coming across and what was going on. And then we flew back, and then we infilled on an EC 130, which was a blacked out 130. So we came in and flew up the Euphrates. I mean, we were right on the deck, and they shot a couple surface to air missiles at us. But so then it turned into Mr. Toad's Wild Ride going up the Euphrates, and then bam, I think we were they told us we were like the fifth aircraft to land at Bayap. But it was surreal. So now it was like, okay, so now I've done all this preparatory stuff leading up to this moment in Jeff's life, and got off the back of the 130, and we did what was called the rapids infill. So the ramp goes down. The crew chief on the aircraft, it was the middle of the night. Crew chief is like, get out. And so we drive off the back of the 130, and then and then the plane is gone, and then the combat controllers that are running the airport, they're riding around on motorcycles, and they're over there, and they're like, get off the runway. There's more aircraft that are coming in. And so um So we set up, but like you could Baghdad, you could see like fire in the distance from Baghdad. You could hear the tanks and the treads that were going, and it was like, whoa, this is like a World War II movie, and here we are, we're in the war now. And yeah, and so we spent the next was that 8 months or so, 7 months there, until the initial hostilities had kind of dropped off, and that's when we started. They started rotating other folks back out, and we'd been going for over, counting our time in Kuwait, we'd been going for a year anyways. Well, the invasion was full fledged, so the tanks had already pushed past. M1 tanks when they're working in in their formations, they are formidable machines. And I mean those stinking things will, I mean, they're doing like 50, 60 miles an hour across the desert. So they had already pushed past the airport. So the airport was secure enough that aircraft could start landing so that they could then start expanding the footprint with other capabilities, like us and whatnot. And so I was attached to the theater commander for SOF, so it was General Harrell, and so we were his bodyguard. So we were his security detachment, and then we were also his contingency force. So he had different intel assets that were attached to him. And then when those agents needed to get pulled out of Baghdad or some of the surrounding area, then it would be, hey, you guys, here's where this guy's at. Here's the bona fides. Here's the far near recognition signal. Go get him. And so we would drive into Baghdad, because Baghdad was still pretty turbulent because the tanks could only do so much, and then infantry had to start going in there, and you're trying to sort through, friendlies and bad guys and whatnot. So we went, we'd go in there and we'd pull these guys and gals out and bring them back so that they could get debriefed, or so they could pass intel. Because it was a little bit harder getting through, because there were a series of lines to get through the American forces that were there. And so we'd drive in and pick them up, and then bring them back out. And then sometimes we'd take them back to areas and drop them off so that then they could do their SDR, which is a surveillance detection route, to see if anybody saw them or whatnot. And then we'd return to base. So we did that, a lot. When we did get into fights, we were night biased, and because we had night vision and lasers, I mean, it wasn't so bad. Even our 50s, me and another guy had developed a rail mount to go onto a 50 caliber machine gun that allowed us. We didn't have to use tracers. We could put a laser up on that 50 cal, and if we're engaging a target in a building or a house or something like that was shooting at us, I mean, other than the fireball out of the front of the 50, I mean, it was pretty unfair, which is the best rule of a gunfight, is don't fight fair, and we were not fighting fair. We had an extreme advantage, yeah, with night vision and lasers. So after Iraq, when I was there, then I got recruited into a counter-terrorist unit that was inside special operations, and then I turned around, and my first trip with them was back in Iraq, and that was pretty uneventful. It was, I think it was there a month or something like that, 2 months or something like that, and then um, I spent the next, 10 years or so back and forth to Afghanistan.
What's Afghanistan like?
Afghanistan, if they can ever stop shooting at each other, I mean, it'd be a beautiful country. It's very similar to Utah, where I live. As a matter of fact, the Kabul, the city sits at the same latitude as we do here in Salt Lake, and the weather is exactly the same. 4 seasons. They don't have the vegetation because the goats have eaten everything, but it's beautiful. High mountains. Their mountains are a little bit bigger than ours are out here in the Rockies, but is beautiful. I liked the Afghans quite a bit. I made some lifelong friends from that are over there. A lot of them now live here in Utah here that came here because there were other Afghans that were here and guys that I had known. So I've got lifelong friends. Afghans have a little bit different look on life versus some of the other places I've been in the world. They've kind of got a kind of like a the Afghans like to say that God made the world and everything that was left over is what he made Afghanistan with. And so you've got like this group, this kind of a cultural group of Uzbeks, Tajiks, Hazaras, Pashtuns that all kind of come together. They speak two main languages there, Dari and Pashto. Most people are Pashto, but the national language is Dari, and Dari is old Farsi, kind of like old English is to English now. Dari is like old Farsi is to modern Farsi, and Farsi is what they speak in Iran. And it was it was good. I was on a thing. It was called the National Strike Unit, so we would fly all over the country and hit targets. And it was, I mean, it was good. I mean, we were well supported, and I was working intimately again the Special Forces mission. We had Afghan commandos that were attached to us that so I'd go out on missions depending on what the mission was, and it may be me and a couple of my Afghans, all the way up to me and a few other advisors, and we'd have 150 of our Afghan guys hitting targets all over the country, and it was good. It was, I mean, um, I say good tongue in cheek, but not that I'm some kind of warmonger or something, but we were well supported, and like I said, I've got lifelong friends from that.
How different was your job in Afghanistan compared to the Iraq War?
I was working with in Iraq. I was more interfacing with Americans, except for the invasion. On the invasion, that was different when I was in regular special forces. But then when I went back a couple of times, I was interfacing with Americans, and so it was more of an intel based job, less of a counter-terrorist. I mean, all of them kind of meshed together, anyways. But then, like in Afghanistan, it was pretty much all direct action missions. It would depend on what the ops tempo was, but I'd typically go over and I'd be over for, about 120 days, and then I'd rotate home. Sometimes I'd rotate home and I'd be home for, I mean, there were a couple times I was home a week and then I was back on a plane. I was headed right back over. And then there were other times that, I'd be home for a month or so. I got one or two breaks when I was in there for I was home for, a couple of months, 2, 3 months, a couple of times. But it was back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And so working the different programs that we had that were going on over there, and all of it was working, trying to, find UBL, find, Bin Laden, if he happened to pop his head up, or find somebody that might know where Bin Laden is, or the financiers, or the commanders with Al Qaeda was our main focus of what we were looking for. We would wrap up Taliban from time to time if we thought they had killed Americans or killed Afghans, or they might have information that would lead us to like UBL or some other. If there was an Al Qaeda nexus that was there, then we'd go grab those guys and bring them in. So it was, but we did everything from, I mean, you name it. From we would do helicopter assaults all the way to um, driving in with just with trucks and walking in and driving straight up to targets and low vis and high vis and driving around in Scooby vans is what we called them, and dressed in local attire, all the way up to full blown like helicopters with gunships and everything in between. It was It was really interesting time in the history of the United States and the history of war, just where so much was meshed together at one time for as long of a period as it was. And so it was good. I mean, I don't miss the war. I mean, I miss the guys, and I miss the camaraderie that was there, but I don't miss the war.
So after Afghanistan, then what with you?
So after Afghanistan, I reached a point where I had spent at that point I'd racked up years and years and years and years on the ground in the war, and I was like, you know what, I'm getting long in the tooth. I'd broken my back at one point and didn't even know it. Legs started going numb, ripped my shoulder out on a target. So I was getting beat up, as you can imagine. That happens with work like that, and so I was like, I probably need to look at retiring. So ended up retiring, and then was like, well, what am I going to do now? And so I started working in the some business. I didn't want to work for somebody else. So I wanted to work for myself. And so me and another guy, we started, well, helped found what was like a emergency preparedness and survival s company called Ready Man, and then that kind of pivoted, and we wrote a series of books. Me and one of the founders wrote a series of books that they just finished making the movie for the first book, and we've sold over 500,000 copies. And it's post-apocalyptic fiction, and it's a good read. It takes place here in Salt Lake. So I had that business, and then I had another business where I had invented a new tourniquet called the RATS tourniquet, Rapid Application Tourniquet, and we were selling those things all over the world. And so I ended up selling that business, and then me and another guy had started a coffee company about the same time, and so I was one of the original founders of Black Rifle Coffee, and so we got that going, and then I kind of got to the point where I'd about had it with business, and so I was like, well, I'm going to retire from the business. So I sold everything back, and then ended up finding time and means, and so I went back to school and got my nursing degree. So at the tender age of 50, I went back to school and became an RN. Started working that, and I work at a kind of part time ish at a musculoskeletal clinic, and it's fascinating. It's a fusion of different disciplines that we use to help people out with their musculoskeletal issues that they may have. We work on a lot of athletes. And I'm also heavy into the mental health space now too, where we run a retreat about every 6 weeks. We run a retreat and help veterans and single moms and people that just everything from people that are really having a hard time all the way up to people that just want to be a little bit better, and kind of everything in between. And so we do that about every 6 weeks too. So um, just living life to the fullest. I just turned 54, and so I figure, well, I'm halfway there now. So I'm gonna keep cranking on my schooling and learning, and continue helping other people out.